Okay, so welcome. Today I wanted to offer some reflections about boarding school syndrome and attachment theory and just how it impacts us going off to boarding school or having some form of childhood trauma, therefore then impacts us as an adult. So enjoy. So yesterday I spoke with Dr. Suzanne Zeedyk, who is one of the world's leading attachment theory experts. She did her PhD in Yale, and I believe she trained as a developmental psychologist, and then she moved to Scotland, and she's been one of the pioneers in the ACEs movement, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences. And I spoke to her yesterday. It's my longest podcast. It was for about 2.5 hours. And what I'd like to do today is just share some of the wisdom that I really learned and kind of picked up yesterday. So first off, if you've been to boarding school, if you haven't, please do watch this episode. Fascinating woman, and really courageous to be speaking up. She was saying this idea. One of them was, she's saying that you've got the trauma movement, which really has only taken off since 2015. 1998 was when the ACEs movement took off, but most people didn't pay much attention to that. Attachment theories in the 1930s. But she was saying that boarding school trauma has been left out of the trauma movement. She's been going to conferences about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, for a number of years, and she says there's never been a discussion about boarding schools and ACEs in the same breath. She says it needs to be made. So essentially, attachment theory is this idea that, let me kind of think, you think of an animal. It's lambing season here, so the lambs are, being born, and you can see that as the lambs get older, they get further and further away from mum. But if they have a surprise, a shock, or some form of fear, they come running back to mum, and then they'll go and feed. And, but gradually as they get older, they get further and further away. But again, soon as a car comes past or there's some shock, they run back to mum until they get to a certain age. And essentially this is the same for children, that we too, but rather than lambs it being maybe 6 months and then they're weaned, and for adults, for children and humans, it's a lot longer. And the theory is that we need to have secure attachments, meaning we need to have our parents there, especially in those first few years, 0 to 3, in order to become securely attached. Interestingly, John Bowlby, who founded the movement, he went to boarding school. And he said in a postcard to his wife a number of years later, after founding the movement, he said, I wouldn't send my child to I wouldn't send my dog to boarding school. Apologies. So this is really fascinating. It's a fascinating subject. So some of the things I learned from her, was this idea that, essentially, and I think I just quote Peter Levine a little bit here, who is one of the world's leading trauma experts. He says, separation from each other is one of the most effective ways to undermine a relationship and even a civilization. So think boarding school, age 4, age 6, age 8, age 11, one of the most effective ways to undermine a relationship and even a civilization. And what else? There was something else in here. So when we kind of have that separation, we become isolated and adrift. We no longer head outside the door to water our gardens, in the process lose the gifts of nourishment. So what she was basically saying is that it's important for us, like those lambs, to go further and further away from mum. Yeah, to be challenged, to go through fear. It's like we need to have these experiences. But then when boom, there's a fear, right? We can run back to mum. So if we think, we might have gone for a day school challenge at school, we come back, we run back to mum, dad, I'm really struggling here. Obviously, at boarding school, this is not happening. Even if, and we were having the discussions, have boarding schools changed? Well, they have, but, you can FaceTime your mum or your dad, but often there's no privacy. So the people who might be the perpetrators are in the same room as you. So, this idea that, okay, yes, we've got communication that we didn't have when I was at school. I think one of my guests, I think it was episode 17, James Harper, saying the payphone trap. You'd go onto the payphone, but only if you were homesick, and then you became the brunt of bullying. So you didn't want to do that. You didn't want to speak up. So I'm wondering if that's changed now. So what she's saying, what she said yesterday, is that we need to have challenges, but then we need to be securely attached to go, Mum, Dad, can I have help? Whereas, as we know, in boarding school, we did not get that. And I'm wondering, it's a hypothetical question, maybe that's changed now. I don't know. So what, in this book, Diane Poole Heller, who's another one of the leading experts, she's saying that, there's 4 ways we can become attached. Either securely, which is the positive way, if we've had a healthy, loving, nurturing upbringing, or avoidant. We want to avoid any form of attachment. And I would have said, for me, I'll go through the 3 of them. Then you've got ambivalent, your push and pull. And I've often heard, being contacted by the partners of, ex-boarders, and they say they just blow hot and cold. One day they love me and they can't get enough of me, and then the next minute it's like, well, go away. So it's like this ambivalent. Something's happened to us when we're young that we move into ambivalent. And then the final attachment area is disorganized. So we've got these 4 different areas. And as I read through them, I was like, oh, I'm a bit of avoidant, a lot less now, a bit of ambivalent, and a bit of, disorganized. And especially at those moments when I'm, say, tired or feeling poorly. So I think this is, that's kind of one of the things I really took away from this talk, is that with attachment theory, with attachment, it's not that we don't have challenges. Yes, we need to have challenges, but we then need to have support. And at school, maybe again this has changed, but I spoke to a headmaster on my podcast just before Christmas, Tuan Zopperman down in South Africa. And he says that there's so much pressure on teaching staff nowadays, especially in the boarding school with paperwork, that, you can't really kind of connect with every boy or girl. And so I would suggest, at home, you've got your mum and your dad there. Okay, they might be busy, but you've got a safe space, hopefully. Whereas at school, you might have one teacher for 50 boys or 60 boys, one house tutor for 60 girls. And I think that therefore brings these attachment issues in, because we have challenges, we may be bullied, but we can't then share, we don't then have the support. Yeah, so some of the other things that Suzanne shared, and the intention is it will go live on Friday, and I'm going to do some outtakes as well of the podcast, so there'll be some little gems, 2 to 5 minutes. So some of the things she said, boarding school, we we learn to deal with feelings through humiliation. And she says you can see that play out perfectly in Prime Minister's Questions Time. She says, that's they call it debate, but it's really just humiliating each other. She says we learn that at boarding school. What else did she say? Something fascinating. She says you will create a society by how you treat your children. So putting them at boarding school age 6, 8, yes, not as much now, but they're still going. Yeah. She talks as well, and this is less boarding school, but she talked about COVID. She's saying that our children today are being shamed by COVID. She's saying that there was a discussion on social media about putting children who are 5, expelling them. And she says, no, these children are being traumatized because they were in lockdown. They were age 2 or 3. Actually, we need a different approach to see that there's trauma there, and they need some form of healing modality. Another thing she said, boarding schools are built to not listen to children's pain. That really touches me. Boarding schools are built not to listen to children's pain. It's like, you'll get over it. Homesick? Oh, you'll get over it. You're upset. Come on, get over it. And that's really important. And another thing she said was, we can speak up now as ex-boarders. I mentioned an interview I did with the Telegraph last week and the fear response which came up for me. And she says, yeah, it's good that you're sharing this because it takes courage. It does take courage to share. And then it passes. So I realise I've gone on for quite a long time, actually. So lots of ideas, but watch the interview. Really fascinating. Really great. And yeah, so just a little bit into the world of attachment theory, and it's a really rich world. So it will go up on Friday. So take care. Blessings.